parents. I tell parents, if you're in a place where you can't get services, you get some grandmothers, you get some students, teach the kid turn taking, teach the kids speech, just interact with them, playing games with them. Also, I want to emphasize that autism is a very big spectrum. One end of the spectrum, you've got someone that remain nonverbal, and at the other end, you've got, you know, people at Silicon Valley, Einstein, famous scientists and musicians. It's a very, very big spectrum. A little bit of the trait, you may get some advantages. Too much of the trait, you get a big handicap. Kids on the spectrum tend to have very uneven skills. They're going to be good at one thing and bad at something else. And there needs to be a lot more emphasis in education to build up on the area of strength. I was good at visual thinking and art, so my parents always encouraged my ability in art.
How can parents recognize some early signs in a 2 or 3-year-old?
Well, no speech would be the first thing. If a child's not speaking when he's 2 years old, something is definitely wrong. Also, kids that are verbal, that have some autistic traits, well, they're not very social, they don't do eye contact very well, poor joint attention. You know, you can start to see it, you know, really early. And oftentimes it's the grandmothers that pick it up because they've raised a lot of kids, so they can see that this kid isn't quite like the other kids.
What are some things that the schools can do to improve the situation in the schools for children with autism?
Well, you get into elementary school, develop strengths. Another thing is sensory issues. A lot of kids with autism, ADHD, and a lot of other different labels have sensory processing problems. Fluorescent lights may bother them. Fluorescent lights may be flickering on and off like a discotheque. When the school bell goes off, it might hurt their ears like a dentist drill. I had that feeling when I was a little kid. I hated it when the school bell went off. It just hurt. One kid's going to have sound sensitivity. Another kid's going to have visual sensitivity problems. I think one big problem environmentally in the school is going to be fluorescent lights. And now as we get into energy saving, this is going to get worse. For some of these kids, and it's not all of them, probably like, 10% of them or so, the whole classroom is going to be flickering like a discotheque. How could you study if that's what the classroom was like?
There's such a controversy going on as far as vaccines and what is the cause of autism. What's your opinion on that?
Well, autism is very strongly genetic, but it's a complicated trait. There's no single gene or something that causes autism. It's little tiny code variations inside a gene. The scientists tracked down one set of code variations, but that only explains 16% of the families. But it definitely has a genetic basis because twin studies show very clearly that if you have identical twins, over half the time, both twins are autistic. Where if you have fraternal twins, that's definitely not the case. Fraternal twins, where they're not genetically the same, have the same instances of autism as just a regular sibling would. So that right there shows it as a strong genetic basis. But there's a lot of controversy about things like environmental contaminants, and I think there's some severe autism that has increased. It's a type of autism where the kid gets some speech when he's like 2, and then he loses it.
Let's talk about the cattle. Where did your passion for the humane treatment of cattle come from?
Well, cattle, that all started out on my aunt's ranch. Then some of the very first work I did, I went out to the Swift plant in Arizona. In the movie, they renamed it Abbott. And I had to find out, the cows actually know they're going to get slaughtered. So I'd go over to Swift's and I'd watch the cattle being handled. Then I'd go out to a feed yard and I'd watch the cattle being handled. And they behave the same way in both places. So they obviously don't know that they're going to be getting slaughtered.
What's the best way to treat them, mainly?
Well, we want to just treat them really calmly. I found if you got rid of all the distractions out of the chutes, things they're afraid of, chains hanging down, reflections, or it's too dark, then if you're quiet with them, they'll walk right up the chute. People also need to learn, cattle handling principles. Things like the point of balance. Obviously you can't stand in front of the animal in a chute and then poke it on the butt and expect it to go forward. I see people doing that all the time. Another thing is moving small groups. Fill your crowd pen that leads up to your single file chute half full. If you can put 10 in it stuffed, you put 5 in.
Can you explain kind of the transition that you've seen in all the years that you've been educating on cattle handling?
Things are definitely a whole lot better. Back when I first started in the 70s and the 80s, there was some atrocious treatment of cattle. Things have gotten better, but there's still room for improvement. People are still putting too many cattle in the crowd pen. I was just looking at a place just the other day, and their crowd pen's supposed to hold 18 cattle, and they were putting 30 cattle in there, and they were turning around, and they were using the prod. It wasn't horrible. It wasn't really bad like the 70s or 80s, but it wasn't the really good cattle handling I would have liked to have seen.